Thank you for those showcases. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now into the first panel of day 2 of the 7th ONGEA Eastern Africa Music Summits. And this panel is about money, how to get financing, how to get those grants, how to get those loans. And we have with us Roy, which is Roy Gitahi, the Chief Conductor at Art at Work, and AKA Mr. Moneybags. He knows where to find the money. I'll let him and his very able panel take us through how to help grow the creative industry with finance. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mike, and excited to be here for day 2. Yesterday was a very good day, but this day promises to be much, much better. I have a very interesting panel. They're all ladies for now. There's a gentleman who is trying to log in, but I will allow the ladies to introduce themselves. These people look like if it was a who's list in finance in the creative sector, this is how these spaces would look like, okay? And I know I can see the humility right now playing. So I will ask them to introduce themselves. My name is Roy Gitahi. I will be your convener today. I run a company called Art at Work, which looks at sustainability of careers in the creative space. We are in finance, we are in education, we are in technology, and also policy. And finance becomes a very interesting a topic for us because without finance, or they say, money is what makes the world go round, and there's no romance without finance. And therefore, we are looking for how to do this. So I will ask in no particular order or in order of alphabets. Christine, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Roy. My name is Christine Nganga, and I'm the founder of Kendi Art, which is an online platform it's actually a marketplace for selling local art, East African art. And our big focus is really on trying to promote the art infrastructure around the visual arts specifically. So we're supporting artists that are doing sculptures, paintings, and all manner of visual arts. And yes, very glad to be here and to be part of this great panel. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christine. What she did not mention, she's also a finance expert, apart from just being Kendi Art, which has lent a lot of impetus into what it is that she's currently doing, and we'll be learning more from her. I will then move to Joyce Kanze. Please introduce yourself.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Joyce Kanze Nzovu. I currently work as the project advisor at advisor at GIZ. So I work under the Global Project Culture and Creative Industries, and I'm stationed in Kenya, and the project works in 6 different countries with a specific focus into the music, fashion, and digital sector. So basically, we work to boost the sector and see how best to make a more structured and more invested creative sector.
Okay, thank you very much. And we have Wakiuru Njuguna, who is the managing partner at HEVA Fund. HEVA happens to be the first fund that has actually looked at the creative sector seriously, but I'll allow her to introduce herself.
Thank you, Roy. Hi, everyone. So I'm Wakiuru Njuguna, and I work with HEVA Fund. I'm the current managing partner at HEVA. And what we do is essentially we look at creative industries under through 3 approaches. The first one is to finance the sector, and in financing, we are able to give both commercial money and grants. And we look at the creative sector from a capacity building perspective, so training artists and creative entrepreneurs to be able to build sustainable businesses, or just to be able to figure out their product positioning, how they can make money off of it, and work with partners like GIZ, and Joyce is one of our partners. And then the third thing is we are also involved in research and insights. particularly for us, is to be able to come up with research to be able to support investment into the sector by other stakeholders, or to inform any policy conversations that we feel are lacking. So that is HEVA in a nutshell. I am very excited to be on this panel, and I look forward to the discussions we're going to have.
Fantastic. We were to have one gentleman, Fred Kioko, who is the head of change and integration at the National Bank of Kenya. He is just trying to log in, having some challenges, but he'll join us as we go along. But also to start this, the reason why finance is very interesting, especially for the creative sector, is that we always say that if a dancer or a comedian walked into a bank and asked for a loan, the most likely answer to that would actually be no. And the reason why is because of the attitudes that the sector has, the banks have towards the sector, or to where money, the attitudes that money has towards the creative sector. So today's topic of grants, loans, and investment in the new normal has got two things that I would like to look at. There's the new normal, which is the period that has now been named after COVID, and the before and well, it was old normal is what was there before COVID, because COVID actually brought out a lot of gaps, challenges that the creative sector was going to face. And so the panelists here are experts then in grants, loans, investments, formal banking, informal banking. And I'd like to ask a number of questions, and I think I'll start with Kanze, who's in grants. What's a grant, and what is the role that it plays in the development or the life cycle of a business?
Well, from our perspective, a grant would be a boost. So a grant boosts the industry. It boosts what's supposed to be happening in the industry. So I'll try to compare it a bit with a loan, in that a loan is completely opposite, because a loan is supposed to build a business, but a grant is supposed to boost. So from a development agency perspective, would probably be working more with institutions, because we want it to spread out the grant, spread it out to a mass of people to be able to see the benefit. So it would either be a grant to build capacity, to help people be better at how they structure their businesses, a grant to grow your space. So depending on how you would view the grant, it would look at it from different sectors. If I'm giving it to a government, I'd look at it from a policy perspective. If I'm giving it to a private organization, I'd look at it from a capacity building perspective. And if I'm giving it to an individual, I'd look at it for them to achieve a specific task. Yeah. So that is how a grant would be, from how we'd give it. It would be on sector specific and level specific, but it's meant to boost, not to create something new, not to develop something to an advanced level, but to boost the industry for you to be able to advance yourself.
Fantastic. That's a good answer. Wakiuru, on the same, your organization merges grants and loans. Okay. And the thing, how are you able to know who to give a grant to and who to give a loan to?
Yeah. That's a really good question. So for us, the way we look at financing the sector, we recognize that not everyone can be able to manage a loan. And again, on the flip side, there are specific kinds of businesses that have enough cash flow to be able to support the repayment of a credit facility. So at the beginning, what we look at is, does this organization or business have any cash flows at all coming into the business? We are very aware that the creative industries, particularly businesses and artists, are not able to, like, money is not easily available in this sector. And so even for artists or businesses that are starting out, we recognize that they do need the boost that Kanze has talked about. But in this sense, for us, is to be able to go to market and have some money to do the work behind the scenes. So whether it's we're giving a grant so that you can be able to prove that you actually have a market available, or to work on your product development in the case of film. So we break down businesses that are able to repay a facility, and those ones that we feel are not yet ready for commercial funding. but they are ready for a certain kind of funding, which for us is a grant. There are instances where we do both a loan and a grant. And for us, the way we look at it is that there is the commercial lending or the commercial money will go towards supporting the generation of revenues. So it's something very directly related to a business selling or an artist selling something to be able to make money off of it. But then the grant in itself goes towards those things that, lenders will not give money for. So if it's a new organization, and maybe they have a lot of admin costs before they're able to go to market and do all that stuff, we are able to recognize that this is money that we can give as a grant to be able to support this for a period of time until a period when they're generating enough revenue for the business to be able to pay for itself. So that's how we kind of like break down the two options.
Fantastic. I mean, it's interesting to see the distinction between the grants, loans, and of course, in investments. And I've hoped that Fred would have been here to talk about the traditional banking and basically how they view that. But the interesting thing here is that, Christine, this falls into your area of expertise, where you have a host of different ways to finance businesses. In the arts, how do you see those different what forms of financing do you see that would work in this particular space, apart from the grants, the loans, and almost the other financial services that are available there?
So let me start by qualifying that, Joyce, we are more focused on visual arts, and I feel like visual arts, out of all the arts, is probably the least looked at, because it's not seen often as lucrative as the others. For example, music or fashion and design. So it's even more challenging. If you're going to a bank, it's even harder for an artist, a visual artist. So what I've seen as we have worked with and tried to partner with various institutions globally, because part of our focus is to try and expand the market for artists to markets where visual arts are more appreciated. What we find is in many markets, government grants are key. And grants are key because, as Joyce said, they boost the sector. But on top of that, they also, if governments recognize what the cultural sector does for basically quality of life within cities, within communities, it is very critical to sort of that documentation of what's going on, getting a sense of the psyche of the public, and really archiving that along the way. So I am quite impressed. Agencies that I've interacted with, particularly in the US, there's the National Endowment for the Arts, and then the Department of Cultural Affairs for New York City are very active, extremely active in supporting the arts. They support art institutions and they support artists directly and on a consistent basis. So that actually allows an artist to be able to predict their ability to access certain funding and to actually build and invest in the business themselves and in their networks. The other thing that I find useful for us, I mean, it's a real challenge here in Kenya to find funding, and it's really about trying to find what you can do. So building partnerships, whether it's locally or internationally, is another way. I'll give you an example. We've currently have a partnership with an art residency program based out of New York City. And while we can't access funding, the amazing funding that's available in that market, what we found ourselves doing is partnering with them so that at a point when they have programming that actually incorporates cross-cultural programming, then we are able indirectly to benefit by being able to showcase artists that we work with as they work in collaboration with artists from other regions. So such networks are key. Again, another thing I find in some of those markets is you find more advanced artists have actually set up funds to support up and coming artists for two reasons. One is just because they know the journey they've been through and the challenges of that journey, and they want to smooth that out, make it a little easier. But secondly, because as they move to the next phase of their career, for some of them, they're going to be art investors. And this is a way of sort of curating what is a new talent that's coming up and the opportunities that might come up from them. Finally, I would say there's the category of private investors and maybe some philanthropists. Private investment in say what we do is where you can find an art lover or a collector who would actually come to you and invest in showing a show, doing a show. Some of these shows, international fairs, and shows are very expensive to participate in. But the reality is we have to get some of our artists actually engaging at that level to develop the networks with the key market players, whether it's art agents and such. And in order to do that, to get over that heavy hurdle of the cost of participating in an art fair, there's an opportunity for investors to actually partner on an event basis and to actually catalyze the opportunities for our artists in that manner.
Okay.
Some of those same investors, as philanthropists, also end up deciding on a one-on-one basis to support a particular artist through a particular journey. And so that's what we look at.
All right then. So thank you very much, Christine, for that. It's actually expands the size. We now have Fred Kioko, who's the head of change and integration at the National Bank of Kenya, who we've also been working with. The topic here was grants, loans, and investments in the new normal. And for Fred, the question here would have been loans. How do loans work, and for what kind of organizations do they work for, and do creatives qualify for that, or is there work that needs to be done? Okay, Fred, we can't hear you. No, even now. Okay, so as Fred tries to sort that out, as we said, so Fred Kioko is from the National Bank of Kenya, who we have been working with to see how to work with creatives. So far, we've talked about the grants from Joy, and that is to increase capacity, expand market, expand structure, an MSME. Wakiuru, of course, have got a different approach in terms of even building research, insights, capacity building, and such like manners. Christine has gone through the challenges of a very difficult niche or genre when you're talking about art. But this has been a journey that many of you have actually experienced. And my question is, before COVID, there's the way things used to happen, or the way grants were given. My question is, has that changed for Joyce? Do we have Fred back? Fred? Okay, we still have challenges with your microphone. Okay, it's your microphone. What's the setting? All right. Okay, so before you still, yes, we still can't hear you. But as I said, before COVID, there were processes that were involved in giving grants. Has that changed after COVID? Has the process of grant making or grant giving changed after COVID? And I know with Joyce, we had been speaking even about the effect that the Ukraine-Russia war is having on Europe. Question is, will those funds still be available to for grants into this particular sector? Joyce?
Well, definitely the process has changed, because I feel like previously a lot of how grants and how money would flow would be from the global north into the global south. So it would come from the Europes into Kenya, and we would necessarily rely on grants continuously. But now there's a new direction where we are saying, well, how can a grant boost something for it to be more sustainable? So when people are having the sustainability conversation, they're not just having a conversation out of the blue, but it's a conversation of how do you permanently make it stay? How do you make that financial boost replicate itself continuously? Does it duplicate? Because not only creatives in Kenya were affected, but also creatives in the European space. So, with all creatives being affected, it means there's a financial split. So, going back also to what Christine was talking about, donors, and she was bringing in the art space where you have collectors and art lovers, right? So, the general creative sector has music lovers and it has fashion lovers. But then again, who is spending money in this fashion space? During COVID, you would see a lot of people relying on the local boost. Just during that period, we were relying a lot on, you'd see a lot of online concerts that were people were paying via M-Pesa. So there are a lot of people now beginning to see, okay, how do I rely on the local audience? How do I bring the local audience on board? So then this also changes how grants and how investments are looked at, because sometimes who within the local space can offer you that grant at the same time as you're looking externally. So who externally is bringing the money? How is the money flow coming in? And what are you offering externally? Because you cannot also not be offering anything. You're either offering to say, once I receive this grant, I will ensure to support the industry, not just for me, but for our continuous growth. So how am I receiving it to boost, and what am I giving back? Because every angle has an objective. So there's an objective from the global north that they're saying, okay, this is the sector we are boosting and we're boosting it in this way. But what is your target on this other end from the global south? What is your objective, and what do you want to do to ensure that even if I cut off a grant today, is my space able to sustain the creative sector? How do you sustain it? How do you bring the Kenyan, for instance, here in Kenya, how do you bring the Kenyan mass, the audience, into your space and say, okay, the creative sector is not just for entertainment, but it's also a business sector, an employment sector? How do you change that conversation so that it's here as much as it's coming from outside?
Quite interesting. The changes that are then happening. One of the things that we've been accused of as the creative sector is that we have relied so much on grants that we have no idea how to repay money that was given to us that had no expectations. And so, Wakiuru, does HEVA experience those particular challenges in attitudes of creatives that, having relied on grants for such a long time, are unable to convert their minds into private sector lending kind of models?
Um, yes, and maybe first let me just add on to the question you asked, Joyce. I think for us, the other thing that we realized as a result of COVID is that the conversation around social protection for artists was not happening, or nothing was being done. And so, as a result of what we found out during COVID, and just seeing a lot of artists moving away from the sector because they couldn't even make a living off of it. A lot of them had to go into like completely new industries to be able to figure out how they could make a living. A lot of them didn't have, incomes for a long period of time. And so internally within HEVA, we are very cognizant of the fact that there needs to be a social protection conversation happening, and, work going towards it, to ensure that artists, if anything was to ever happen, in future, that artists are protected and that they're cared for. So it's things like health insurance. How do we work around that? Mental health and such things. And so these are conversations we're having with even some of our partners to try and explore how we can be able to support the sector, obviously through associations, to have this in mind as they think about, post COVID, and what they want to do and how they want to structure the sector. And then as a result of that, I wanted to say that we've had like a lot of more focus on what Joyce was saying around local purchasing. So trying to ensure that the businesses that we work with and the ones that we put in commercial investments have a sustainable local market. So we're really interested in figuring out, these platforms that are coming up, how sustainable are they? How can we support a lot of this digital economy kind of like conversation to work for the creative sector to ensure that creatives are able to access markets not just locally, but then also internationally. And to go back to your question around relying on grants. So this has been like the bane of our existence from the very beginning. I think when we started, one of the things that we saw was that grants were dwindling in terms of like the amounts of money that was coming towards the creative industries was becoming less and less as the years went by. So the question of sustainability for us has been at the core of why we started HEVA and why we started to innovate around financial models that were not just relying on grants, but then were also thinking around, funding mechanisms that would allow for a lot more artists to be able to access funding. So non-grant models that would allow for artists to access funding, but then also affordable financing at the end of the day. I think it was quite a journey. I guess I'd say like in 2014 when we started, and in 2016 when we put out our first fund, it was very difficult trying to shift the mindsets of creators and artists and entrepreneurs in this space to look at what they were applying for as money that they needed to repay back, and we got our fingers burnt at that point. But I think essentially what we realized is that because there are so many nuances in this sector, you cannot come in as a financier and say, I'm going to invest in the sector or I'm going to give people loans just like the way traditional financing works. And so we realized that innovation around financial products was very important. And that's when we were able to kind of like crack it, because we realized the reason why people were so scared of grants was because the way in which not grants, loans, the way in which loans were being given was, do you have collateral? If you don't have collateral, you're not going to get a loan. If you have collateral and you don't pay, someone will come for your collateral.
Mhm.
Those kind of like
Those,
very strict guidelines, and they were like very specific, and we felt that that could not work for the sector that has a lot of young women, a lot of young people who do not have collateral, who are just starting out and trying to figure everything out. And so how we worked around this is, one, our training was able to support organizations and artists to look at their work not just as something they do on the side, but then something that can make them a living or an income. And eventually maybe they could stop their day jobs, maybe in a bank or in a hospital, and they could come to the creative industries and make a sustainable living out of it. And so this was something that we worked on for the very first years. It was a lot of work, but we have seen a lot of progress now, because we're seeing a lot of artists starting to think about alternative ways they could raise financing, alternative ways they could, get incomes through their work, through blockchain and NFTs. And then at the heart of it, the financial innovation was to say, okay, so an artist needs a loan, but is it realistic to make this artist pay for the loan on a monthly basis? So can we look at how money flows into their business, and then we work a payment structure that is very aligned to how money is coming in and out of their business? And as a result of that, once we figured out that innovation and said we're going to have different products for different industries within the creative sector, and also depending on where the business is, we're going to do a hybrid model, or we're going to we're going to innovate around how we're giving this money to creatives and how we're investing in their businesses. As a result of that, we've seen a lot more I guess, goodwill from the sector, and also repayment in terms of like the commercial models has increased to the extent where we've had a couple of people come to us and say, I actually don't want a grant. I want a loan because I want to test and see, is my business actually sustainable, or am I just lying to myself? And can I build something bigger than, what, like just me producing? Can I build an actual organization out of this? Yeah.
Okay. I was quickly going to ask Fred to comment, but I think he's also dropped off. He's still having challenges with the same. Um, I like something that you said. Somebody can actually leave banking and finance to join the arts, which basically has just described our dear friend Christine. Christine, there was a transition from what it is that you were doing to get into the arts. How was that? How was that change? How did financial institutions look at you when you were, on that other side, and how they're looking at you now? What has changed? Has COVID changed anything about the viewpoints that they currently have?
Thanks. I'll say I'm not totally out. I still do a bit of my, I'm still in a bit of investment banking space. But in terms of what has happened pre and post COVID, I think in the art space we have seen a shift even in artists, to what Wakiuru was saying around, actually even in Joyce, around the need to really figure out a sustainability locally. So I think I found we had artists who were expecting this infrastructure that we're trying to build to do everything for them, and they just bring their art and it is consumed. But now I've seen them working much harder beyond digital and to actually market more, learn those skills that they really hadn't developed. We've seen a lot more of that, and more artists doing great. In terms of us, our experience, so I'll say from day one, I've been the sole funder of this initiative. It's a passion project. So this has been sustained mainly from my savings and one or two of the the sales we might do here and there, we plow it back into running the organization. So that's been quite a challenge because it's quite an investment to be here still in year 5. And of course, as we were hitting sustainability and we were seeing that happening, COVID hit. And a lot of, what we relied on being in some events, fairs and all, and selling some art or even just our customers who would buy art online or even through, because we also do more curated artwork through newsletters to our collectors. Everyone was, of course, preserving cash in cash preservation mode, and therefore they slowed down on purchases. So that, of course, affected our sustainability in a big way. And to a large extent, we went from being just having hit sustainability to not where, we had to, I personally had to put in a lot more. So that's been our experience. In terms of banking, maybe I can comment a little what maybe Kioko would have said. I think at the end of the day, banks will be banks and their criteria are the same. They don't change. They look at the 5 C's or 3 C's, depending who's talking about it. It's your credit, collateral, the reputation of the individual, etc. I mean, they do not veer off from that, and I don't think we can expect that much. But I also want to dispel this myth around, and therefore I will be differing a little with some of my panelists around sustainability and being able to shift completely out of whatever you're doing and going fully in the arts. I find amongst the artists that we've worked with, the ones who have been most successful are the ones that are balancing more than one thing and are able to stay true to their art in the same way. Well, and it's a spectrum. There's some who are artists and dabble in this other work, and there are people who are more in this other work and double in the arts. And I think we allow them to be in that spectrum because while it's important, I think, for those who are on the margin can move from expecting support throughout and be able to be sustainable. There'll always be certain arts that are much more challenging to function on a commercial basis. And I think for that reason, there are those artists. We have artists who, when they make their decent money, they open a shop somewhere, and that helps them pay for their studio consistently, not that they lose their studio and go back home and therefore lose their customers. So I think it's important to recognize all the different models of working.
Right. It's very interesting that you should mention about what Kioko would have said. And the thing is an evolution, because one of the things that has been brought out by Wakiuru and even Joyce is the dwindling grants and the need to actually stop relying on foreign markets to be able to fund initiatives or the creative sector here in Kenya. But how are we building the local creative space? And if Kioko was here, because I have also interacted with them, there has been an initiative where we've also now trying to get banks to see the creative sector as a viable investment space for them. But as you said, banks will never change. Banks basically have a structure that has been established over the last 500 or so years, and they're not going to change. So the thing is for the creative sector now to begin to understand how do banks operate, and then try to align to those particular things, where there's capacity building that has to be done, which I'm glad Wakiuru at HEVA mentioned, that there was need for people to actually change the way they were thinking. The surprise that people say, I don't want a grant, I want a loan, which just tells you that creatives are not do not fall into that what is it called, that stereotype that they just want freebies. It's people who want to start careers and run those particular careers in just like normal in a normal manner. They just want the opportunities to be there. But the question then becomes: is there a process where we can be able to transition creatives from where they are and align them to the bank through a process of capacity building? Who falls into that space? I know HEVA has mentioned that, but if somebody wanted to have a capacity in that particular space, where would they go for that particular support? Joyce, any thoughts on where they would go?
Well, I look at it from an association perspective, and associations is something also Wakiuru mentioned, because at the end of the day, a lot of people would say, oh, creatives don't have structure, but structures do exist. But how strong are they? Becomes the question. Because at the end of the day, from a development agency perspective, I cannot come and throw money to every creative. That is impossible. Even for banks, they cannot do that. And banks, some are changing structure. Some are beginning to look at certain creatives in a certain way, especially in the fashion space. You see them being able to invest a bit more on that end. So I would say I'd go to what Wakiuru was saying: capacity building. Who already is in the space trying to do this? Putting money there and say, okay, HEVA or say Sarkasi Trust or another group, you have muscle in this or knowledge in these aspects. How do you then bring on board other creatives? Bring in associations. But again, how structured are associations? So they need to be empowered to form a structure to see, as an association, how do I support my members? What am I offering association members? Because then it's always from a perspective of, I'm seated at the helm, but I don't know what to do. We can only do it more of a social gathering. Whenever one of our artists or one of our creatives needs help, we'll bring them on board and sort that issue. But then how do you build their capacity to be able to see it from a broader perspective? If the associations have adequate information, adequate structure, then they give back to their members, because then they form something that is familiar to them. If we are all in the visual arts, we're familiar with each other, we are familiar with our challenges, we are familiar with our needs, we can be able to structure and say, okay, I will go and tell HEVA, listen, we have a business need here. We need to be able to figure out how our members can have access to funding, how our members can have access to, even if it's donations, how do they access that? Because some donors will say, I don't know where to give my money. So they have the money, they don't know where to take it to because they don't know who is structured where. So if it's an animation association, how they structure, what are their needs, what are their challenges, how can they align themselves to support their individual members? Then in that way, then you have this structure that is falling into place where there's one end, the knowledgeable person, who is now sharing this knowledge to an association or something structured, and members are able to now gain from that. That way, it becomes easier to see a flow in the industry.
So basically, there's need for structure. When people talk about the creative sector being very fluid, and a bank being solid or rigid in its way, and what you're trying to do is marry those two. For Wakiuru, who's been working with these fluid creatives and also trying to be a structured fund and lender, the question: what challenges have you seen, and what it is have you done to be able to make that easier for them?
Okay, it's taking a bit long to to unmute, but let me also just first of all say that perhaps I didn't speak about the other side of the creative sector. I just respond to Christine around the specific industries that are not necessarily like monetized, and we do recognize that. We recognize that there are industries in the creative sector that have more cultural value, I guess, and bring more value to the culture of communities, etc., and not necessarily in terms of like monetizing, but it's a value that cannot be measured through money. And so when I was talking about the distinction between financing through grants and loans, these are some of the organizations we actually give grants to, because like, let me give you an example. When we were doing a fund called the Cultural Heritage Fund, which was mostly to promote the cultural heritage in this country, those were grants, because cultural heritage is something that cannot be monetized. And so we did give grants to organizations like the Presidential Music Commission, for example, who at the heart of it, they do such valuable work, but then you can't really monetize it, because how do you monetize years and years of music libraries, for, recorded from Moi days to now? How do you monetize that? So those are some of the things that we look at. But then when it comes to the fragmentation of the sector, I guess for us, one of the things that we are looking at, I talked about the kind of like formalization or like business skills training that we have been doing for businesses. And that we actually, some of the projects that we're running right now, we are partnering with GIZ, and it's to start from from when an artist is getting into the sector, to have their mind frame, I guess, think about it as a business, not just as them being able to have like really good music, but how are they able to put that together into a structure that someone can come into future and say, I want to invest in this musician. So for us, it's them looking at it as, do I have a managing company? Do I have someone who's in charge of my PR? Do I have and being able to curate those kind of structures for the businesses, and have them see that this is something that is important to them. So it's a work that we've been doing around formalizing. I don't want to say formalizing. I feel like that word can be a bit condescending for the sector.
Yeah,
But it's a
empowering.
work that we've been doing to shift the mindsets from them just looking at it as a passion for the ones who want, because again, it's also important to recognize that not everyone wants to make money off their art. Some people are very happy to just produce and then give it for free, or do something with it. But yeah, so we've been working to build, shift that mindset and show people that they're actually people who've done it before. So there's a mentorship aspect that comes in, where once you show someone that this person has been able to do it, like Sauti Sol, for example, and there's a young musician who's coming into the space, then it's them, they're going to start to think, how can I make my music turn into a business, and what are kind of like the structures I need to put in internally. And I think also being able to make it a bit more subjective, where businesses are businesses across the board, but like I said, there are some nuances for creative businesses that are important for people to recognize from early on, even as they're building their business. How do they build it as a creative business that is able to function and thrive in this sector? Lastly, I wanted to say the question around structures is also quite important, because we've worked before with, for example, the Kenya Fashion Council. During the COVID period, they got, it was something around them being able to supply for an organization, a big organization, and they were going to supply masks. And we were able to work with them where they brought on board a lot of their members as part of this big LPO that they received. And then we were able to finance that LPO to a certain extent. So I think associations are key to the sector. If you're an artist, if you're a creative entrepreneur, I would highly advise that you find an association you can join that aligns to what you're doing. Because I think through those associations, like Joyce said, developmental organizations like to see that they are working with a collective of people as opposed to individuals. So they work pretty well in being able to promote a lot of the needs of the sector. But then also for governments, when it comes to policy, it's easier to go through an association and have your voice heard as opposed to one individual artist. So I would highly recommend everyone on the call to join an association that aligns to what they're doing.
Fantastic and well said. Now we have Fred, who we have been waiting for to answer some questions here. Fred, hopefully your mic is sorted out, and thank you very much for joining the call. We've talked about grants, we've talked about loans, or the transition between those, and basically how banks view the creative sector. The question is, how do you view the creative sector right now? Before I go into a series of questions, because everyone has had multiple rounds of this, so we'll focus on you for a while. Fred? The mic is still a problem. Okay. Yeah, there's still a challenge on that. We see you, but we have no sound on this side. Oh, microphone, your... Okay, so as it tries to sort that, it almost sounded like this. Yes, as Fred tries to sort out that microphone problem, there I see on his chat he says there's a caveat that banks are changing attitudes towards the creative sector and towards the MSMEs. And I know these are some of the things that Fred would have talked about in terms of the way the creatives are probably looked at in terms of risky to lend to because of a lack of structure or a lack of associations, as Joyce and Wakiuru have alluded to. And the question then that I would have asked Fred, and now would push to Christine. Christine, you're familiar with banks. You have been with investment banks, and let's now talk about investments in the new normal. What are investors looking for when we know that the creative space is lucrative in the West, in the US? We know that there's huge potential in Africa because of culture and stories that have not been told. The question then becomes, how best should we align to investments from even collectors, people who want to invest in new areas or new untapped markets, like the creative space?
I think a big part of it is what I'm seeing in the chat. There's Arnold who has mentioned that funds are out here and opportunities. What we need are talent managers. The other person is talking about basically looking at the whole value chain around the creative sector, whatever subsector that could be. I think developing that aspect is also very key. Associations are a big part of it, but also where the talent managers, whether it's for or agents, in visual arts, we talk about art agents, we talk about talent managers in music, in sports. In many of these of the developed markets, you find that they are very established, some of them even, multi-billion-dollar companies that are running, managing the careers of artists. The artist is able to develop their artwork, but there's somebody who's pushing their appearance at certain events, negotiating their contracts, etc. And I think until we start seeing a bit of that in that market, the private side and how private investors can engage will remain a little nascent. I had the opportunity to speak to somebody I know who's involved in the music sector in the US, and they said, interestingly, when you look at what's happening in West Africa, and like in Nigeria, for example, and how there's a lot of crossover of artists. Now, I'm not an expert, so this is anecdotal, but they mentioned the fact that a number of these very large companies, talent managers, even the companies or producers like the Sonys, etc., have, if you look at the agents that they have, those targeting Africa, there are a number who are actually West African. So they actually start looking for talent in the markets that they already know. Now, we could probably be trying to get a lot of them coming to the rest of the continent, right? And sampling our music more and actually discovering more artists and developing those relationships. So I think networking is important. Linking to the bigger market is important. And once that happens, then if you can have your artist booked for show after show, they will have the cash flows that everybody would be looking at, and you would not really be concerned about, whether they can repay or not. But until that happens, of course, there's room for this gap with the grants. The other one, maybe a quick other example I'd give is one of the artists that we work with, who it's been an impressive journey for him, is through social media and more intensively during COVID. He put out a lot of work and was discovered really on Instagram, and over that period, over COVID, was able to sign up with a talent manager in a big market, was able to sign agreements with several galleries on different continents. And on any given week, he's shipping out several pieces of artwork. And prior to that, he was very dependent on the local market, and it was a very challenging market. I know at the moment he's about to finish building his family a home. So it's a real COVID success story.
Yeah, so that's a wonderful success story that is that is there. And when you're talking about markets, their markets then become a two-edged sword. You can actually have a market that is out there where people appreciate the kind of work that we do more than the locals here. But when markets out there are not working, you actually need the markets here to be able to support the creative endeavors. There's a question here of what criteria do you have for supporting entrepreneurs using tech to find sustainable solutions for the creative economy? Like I'm sure tech like what Christine is using on Kendi on Kendi art. What approach do you have, that is to Joyce and Wakiuru, on supporting such entrepreneurs? Joyce, you want to go first?
Well, I'll go first. So it will be more on the capacity development aspect. So for us, we'd definitely try to find anyone who can share knowledge on that and fund that perspective. Our other angle would be either to, because as we said, we target a mass, either to work with an organization that can be able to support, offering either financial support or knowledge support. So that would be our direction.
All right, then that's straightforward and to the point. Wakiuru?
I guess for us we are able, so we do have different funds, like I said, all are aligned to where the businesses are at the point where they're applying. So we have something for seed businesses or seed stage companies. We have an early stage fund as well, and then we have a growth fund. So depending on where the tech comes in, or the business is, then they would have to meet certain criteria for the funding they're asking for, if it's funding they're requesting for. And once we give funding, we're also able to support the business with other business support, whether it's legal, to help them think through the legal stuff, HR, things like marketing, etc. Part of that criteria, the higher you go up the scale I've given you, the more documentation or formal documentation we require from you. So like, for a growth stage business, we will ask for things like audited statements, because if you're requesting for, you know, if you're requesting for a commercial financing product, we feel that it's important that, we're able to see your track record. So we will ask for a bunch of different things. I would recommend the person who's asking to just check out our website. We also have grants that are going towards supporting businesses under one of our funds called Ignite Fund. So if you could just go on our website on www.heva.com, then you can see what's available currently and where your business would probably fit in the best.
All right, then fantastic. Um, and I've seen people talk. Um, oh, Joyce, you have been asked to clarify what it is that you said. Some people had were having technical difficulties um, hearing what it is that you said. So could you just take back that question?
I would say we'd work more with organizations that have either knowledge on different aspects or grant support on different access. So our way of funding the sector would be to support a specific organization or private sector partner to be able to now directly offer support to individual creatives. So this would be either capacity building or financial.
Okay, that is fine. I see another question here. Do traditional banking institutions also need training to understand the industry? In my experience, even when the business was fairly formal, credit departments need to appreciate the nuances of the business. Kioko, can we hear you now? All right, he's still trying to sort out. But this would have been a very good question for Kioko to respond to, and I think I'm going to respond to that because I wear another hat as art at work and with the initiative that we're having with the Kenya Bankers Association. And I think I mentioned this to you, Kanze, where we had we've done all this work to facilitate access to credit, access to loans for the creative sector. I said I wear another hat, so let me turn this around. So I'm not the speaker right now. So and one of the things that we have found is a challenge in when you have when you have the traditional things of like what happens when a guy walks into a bank, sagging jeans, red glasses, open shirt, with the chains, and goes to the relationship manager and says, "Hey, yo, hit me up with $500,000 bob." What do you think the reaction of that relationship manager is going to be, especially when they have KPIs where they are told, "Please do not give out loans to risky individuals," and then somebody comes in representing risk? All right. So while the CXO level of the bank may understand what it is that is trying to be achieved, the relationship manager, the credit manager, do not understand how the creative sector actually works. And there's something being done about that, because the thing is, yes, there's training that is needed. There's even a term for it. It's called unconditional bias, where you already have a bias even before listening to somebody, but simply the way they have presented themselves, and the training is important, because the thing is, you have gatekeepers to finance, and this is your relationship manager, your credit manager, and team who are there. So that was my other heart, and I hope, Pauline, your question has been answered. And I feel we're also missing a lot from Kioko not being here, because many of these affect banks. National Bank has been one of the pioneering banks that we have seen accepting to take the leap of faith when it comes to providing finance and loans to creatives. It's also understanding those particular structures. How are they structured? How are you registered in the first place? And many people call themselves freelance. They have their own names, but they've never registered their businesses. When you're even talking about the kind of support that you get from for an MSME, it's different depending on the registration that you have that you have gone through, and people should actually be helped to basically structure themselves in a way that the MSMEs can actually receive funding and financing, or even technical assistance that is available. There's a question here: do we have physical offices? Yeah, we do. So the thing is, I think the speakers here will also put in where their offices are, or refer them to a link that they can be able to get more information about what it is that is going on. PE firms have more risk appetites, and of course, this one will go to Christine. Christine, on private equity and other forms of financing, where are we post COVID, especially in the creative space? That was the speaker asking.
Okay. I think in the local market there isn't too much appetite. I would actually distinguish between private equity and venture capital. Maybe venture capital, there is room there, and angel investors, so individuals who are willing to put in a little money. I think there are a number who have supported people in, for example, the fashion sector. I think I've seen a bit of that. But it's a very small space. Private equity really is growth capital in the private space, so those would not be dealing with a startup. But I can envision, for example, as a space, and I'm just not conversant on the music side, where somebody like a Sauti Sol or some of the other larger ones are able to access funding that, from whether it's venture capital or maybe some private equity, but that would be for a very select. I think internationally there are funds that are specific to these sectors, whereby they enable artists to get over the hurdle of putting on an extremely expensive show, or whether it's music or fashion or the arts. There are funds like that that do exist, and some of them even have a grant focus. In the art space, there's there are a couple of funds that had set up to even provide loans to, interestingly, not so much on the to the artist who's making, say, a painting, who makes expensive paintings, but they would actually fund collectors who are maybe working in other sectors and are credit-worthy people, but when it's an expensive piece of artwork, they're able to finance that piece and ensure that piece in the process. And of course, then that releases some liquidity for the artists. But I would say in Kenya, that is still not a very active place.
Okay, so the thing is that there are processes that are being requested here, where you're saying that there has to be proper registration of the creative. There has to be basically there's some capacity building that people need to go through in terms of financial inclusion, business knowledge, IP, also learning about IP and other business management, or even how to look for market, how to develop that, or even how to have governance within their own self. and then be part of an association, which is basically a louder voice and a bigger voice that they can now be able to have issues articulated, lobbied for, and basically have a force to be able to talk to that. There's a whole, then it means that in the background there's a whole process that needs to be done, and this is where government now comes in. And in your opinion, Joyce, Wakiuru, or Christine, do you feel that the right policy and legislative framework has been put in place to be able to support this transition from very amorphous type of organizations to more structured MSMEs in the creative space, that then would allow services to be given to those organizations in the manner that other sectors get funding for their activities? Joyce?
I would say on the bright side, policies do exist. But how knowledgeable are we about these policies to be able to say where we need change? So policies might be existing. Some of them are very, very old and need change. So then there's need for people to also see and review. And then I'll go back to now networking, partnerships, and associations, working together to understand what exists and then where are the loopholes and where do we need change. Because at the end of the day, for the government to be able to say, we are changing this, or we are transitioning this, or we are revising this, then there has to be a mass of people that will say, well, this is not working for our sector. Even the registration processes, if we have a couple, most of them are very detached. You just stay in one place and after you just stay in a different office. So how do you streamline this? And how do you speak together to say, let's streamline? So this exists, but then there are certain areas that might need adjustment.
All right. So I'll also ask you to speak just slightly about a program that I know you're aware of called Pangasana. What is that all about, and what's the intended goal of that particular program and its effect on the creative sector?
So Pangasana is a program that is supported by GIZ. So we are supporting Sarakasi Trust to be able to assist us in delivering this program. So far we're working with 10 associations, and the aim is for them to, one, understand their role as associations, because they already have all these missions and all these plans, but what is their role as associations? And what do they understand about policy? How do they lobby for better positioning? How do they lobby for financial support? How do they offer support to their members? So the aim of this program is ideally to structure associations, one, as a first step. Another phase of it is for them to understand policy, have dialogues together in understanding policy, and then now begin to offer service to their members.
I think you need to speak.
Leroy, am I audible?
You are now audible and looking much cleaner and clearer. Well, so just a minute, Fred. I'll get back to you in just in just a minute. Yeah, even looking more shiny. Yeah. So anyway, let's first of all have Joyce finish up with this with her comment on Pangasana. Please, Joyce, proceed.
Yes, so finishing up on that, it's how do they understand their role and what do they offer their members? And then how do they now begin to have that conversation with the government? Because now they'll be able to say, okay, we understand what exists, we understand changes that are needed. So that is the whole point of Pangasana, to strengthen them enough to stand on their own two feet and to offer something substantial to their members as well.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much for that. I just needed the audience to hear what it is that we're talking about. Now that we have Fred back online, I think there's a whole host of questions here, especially around the banks. People say that they have walked into the bank and been looked at in a very suspicious way, especially when they come in their creative uniforms. And so the question is, what is the attitude that banks have right now towards creatives, and how has that changed post COVID?
Thanks, Roy and panelists. I picked up a bit of your sentiment, and I think Christine's, that banks have been the same for the last 500 years and they will not change. So
That was
you
me.
can imagine my frustration of trying to put in a word as I had that, because it's a death knell, and those were like the two last nails in the coffin. But again, in jest. I think banks have been a disservice to themselves. My current, organization included. And I think the mantra comes from the fact that banks and banking was about a place you went, not a service you acquired. So you had to go to the bank, and the bank looked at you as a suspect who wants to take out money and never bring it back. So that DNA has come in from really the philosophy of debt and what you take and owe. And I think to bring about a transformation of change, it means coming to the table with other actors. And I've listened to Wakiuru and Joyce, and the avenues and interventions through partnerships and caucusing around what to do. And I think banks have to really take the same attitude, where we've got to join the conversation with the dignity and decorum of the individuals, because it's really about the human condition. Banking now is about the customer obsession, collaboration, and engagement through relationships to actually solve life's problems. So creatives are really no different from any other sector. The approach to manufacturing, for example, the approach to agriculture is the same impetus and seriousness that banks today, including ourselves at National Bank, have taken around the creative sector. And I think also there's a convergence from the same misconception about banks from their past, has to do with the understanding around the creatives. Because if, say, for example, you're a comedian, you are actually in the business of being unserious, a serious business. So getting people to see you seriously requires that there's an interface between how you perform your craft and also how you engage about your requirements. A comedian or a person in arts and crafts or an actor has to portray a certain aspect of culture that is there for their trade. But it doesn't mean a comedian doesn't mean that is comedy on the Monday morning where you have to pay your bills. And therefore, I think there's a meeting of minds of bringing both parties together. And here I don't mean banks, I mean enablers, including banks, where we come, understand the flows, the human condition around each sector of the larger creative umbrella, and then dialogue and create purposeful and meaningful products through propositions. Yeah, not necessarily selling an account or insurance, but selling a partnership and a life journey. And this is about owning homes. This is about enabling the actors in that sector flourish in health and well-being. So partnering around what we can do over the long term. This is about structuring pensions and benevolence for eventualities, and looking at the sector with the seriousness it deserves, like any other sector, means a meeting of minds. So coming to this forum and other similar engagements therefore breaks the bounds on how both sides see each other. So just like you've put us in the Middle Ages, Roy and Christine, it's also to reflect and say, even in the king's court in the Middle Ages, there was a court jester. But being a court jester was serious business, because you had to break the ice when people were at court. And it takes some skill and guise to express that. And harnessing that talent means capacity building, including banks who come up and talk about posterity. When you're not in the limelight and you're looking at your sunset years, then the nest egg that you have to create through wealth protection, wealth creation is where now we are as banks have to play in. And both at an individual level, where we can have conversations with actors in the creative space, and at an association level where we work with umbrella bodies to harness the power of scale around bringing together the earnings and flows, helping invest those royalties, helping invest those events, and helping that supply chain. We already do the same with areas like special groups through the ACPO supply chain programs, where there's a focus around women, persons with disabilities, and youth. Similarly, coming to the creative space, not just to offer loans, that's really lazy banking, but to partner and say, what do we need for posterity? Interventions for the children of the creative space, because they have to take up those professions and skills. You will need, for example, a furnace here. You will need an instrument there. You need an oboe. You need a violin. You need a digital studio where you can master your artifacts and crafts. You need a marketplace so that you can sell your wares. You need to sell your beauty products. You need to sell, Christine needs to sell her lipstick brand, and that's creative. So as banks, we at National Bank want to champion and partner with others to walk the journey where it is the respectability of the sector we must promote and engage with the actors in real time, so that we can actually bring about enabling the human condition. And it's down to very few things. Owning a home, health and well-being, education, and sustainable living. That's at the core.
Yep.
Now, solutioning around that means bringing, say, for example, access to affordable homes. Yes, because they are available. The counties create them with developers, including banks, and we can showcase them to the creative sector as well. So when people have their great payoffs, they can put a down payment on a house, so that in the later years, you do have the peace of mind, of a home, and you want to do home improvement. So therefore, you need just-in-time engagement around actors, say, who bring about furniture, and that furniture coming from the creative space. But that is a kind of thinking we have as banks have to be involved in, and move along with civil societies, the creative umbrella bodies, the SACCOs, the groups, the formal and informal groups, and also with government. So, and I think, Roy, working with government is very important at a county level, powering and motivating for an increase in the creative funds that are available to the county budgetary system, but also looking at championing the re-establishment of culture and going back to our roots. So the renaissance that people are bringing about gaming, bringing about arts and crafts that accentuate the Africanism around us is commercially viable. And we're looking at also trade partners who can actually establish corridors that allow us to export our crafts, our curios, our soapstone artifacts, and our art. This is stuff that was done in the late 80s, the early 90s, showcasing our wares in international galleries and partnering to create wealth around those earnings. So I think a transformed mindset, and us as banks coming away from our medieval days of suspect lending, but through partnerships and collaboration with all the actors, and including the representation of the organizations that the panelists here today represent is walking the journey together. Because you have a brother who's a creative. I have a sister who's a creative. You have a nephew who's a creative. We can't all work in banks. We can't all work in schools. Somebody's got to give us comedy. Somebody has got to give us the flavor of life. And we are all invested in enabling this. And in that, doing that, we create decent work and economic growth. And that's right up there in sustainability alongside the SDGs.
So before we,
the mic
sorry to interrupt
was
you.
loud and clear, and
yes, it
putting
was.
a word in for banks. Thank you.
Very good. So thank you very much, Kioko. In fact, I've been listening to you, and I'm just saying that there's so much to unpack. And of course, there's of course, for some people, they're now looking at their screens twice, wondering, is that a bank speaking? Which is good, because this is not something that we have been listening to. But very quickly, in conclusion, because I see we have some limited time. Somebody may be seated there wondering, wait, is this the right time to approach a bank, or do you need some time to sort yourselves out as a financial institution? And the question then would be, what can we do today moving forward? And what opportunities are there for the creatives when it comes to either seeking out grants, seeking out concession loans from HEVA fund, from also getting services from the bank, and even getting advisory from the likes of Christine, who have walked this journey from investment bankers, now have been in the creative space and are seeing what's happening. So very quickly, a whole round. I will start with Kioko first. I will ask. Well, it's because they are all ladies. I will ask Kioko. In 2 minutes, what is the commitment that a bank can have to a creative today, and even if the products are not ready, how long, and what do creatives expect to see over the next 6 months from the bank? 2 minutes, go.
No, I think first, I assure you on behalf of myself and my organization and the larger banking fraternity, will be in your faces and we'll be creative about it. So it is to come to you and have a dialogue and ask, what do you require, and co-create? Because we come to you and say, over the next 3 to 6 months, and I dare say even in the next 2 months, you'll see more partnerships from us as banks, specifically even as National Bank. For example, we have partnered with some production houses to promote the music industry, and therefore create a pipeline where from the word go, we can walk the journey with artists at their formative stage. So we want to do that, empower savings and investment schemes, and create wealth from the word go. So you will see us in that mantra. We also want to discuss wealth creation alongside financial literacy, because there's negative polarity around financial literacy in saying, as a creative, don't lose your money, save your money. But I think the mantra you will see from us over the next 2-3 months is that as a creative, create wealth, create prosperity, and with financial literacy, so that there's a positive polarity and the recognition, just like any other segment, that here we're looking at micro and SME businesses and enabling them. And you will also see formal capacity building programs that go two-way, because banks have to understand the creative sector actors from the creatives themselves, from the comedy experts, from the arts and craft experts. Let's hear it, walk in your shoes, have me and Christine in a comedy. Let's see how it feels when we are out in the sun. So I think we have to have a trade-off, and also bring the sector to banks and see and hear what banks do, and then have a meeting of minds. So that's the commitment. And out there is to walk and journey together to attract funds through the MSME programs, to give accessible lending so we can go to now posterity. Affordable housing, affordable health, affordable medical solutions from the word go. So that's the commitment, Troy.
All right, 2 minutes. Thank you for taking those 2 minutes for the same. So 2 months is the commitment that we have to be able to see in your face activities happening from the bank to the creative sector, and looking forward to being part of that particular journey. In my other hat, this one, yes, we're already working with National Bank on the same. So back to the speaker, Joyce. Your commitments, 1 minute. What do we expect to see in the industry? For you, I think I'll give you a little bit less time. Very good.
So I would say from the developmental perspective, many organizations have come on board to boost the sector, and they're working in different angles. So you'll notice different organizations have taken different positioning, and it is good for creatives to take note of this, because then they can gain benefit from different sources depending on what is offered. So looking at GIZ, and what GIZ has been offering has been capacity development, and I guess they shall continue to offer because some of our programs are still running.
All right.
I would say we are on a continuous process.
Very good. So at least for that, the development organizations are still looking at areas that they can be able to facilitate, and there's information out there how people can be able to access that information. Thank you very much. Wakiuru, we're looking at HEVA, who has been a champion for the creative space. What do you expect to see more, or any exciting things that will happen from HEVA over the next few months?
Thanks, Roy. I wanted to challenge Fred, first of all, before I make my commitment, just to challenge him to work with organizations like GIZ and so many other organizations already in the space who are working on capacity building for the sector. Because I think to some extent the sector feels like it's been over capacity built. So then the question is, when is the money coming into the businesses? So if you can work with organizations on this platform, out of this platform, to just like really, and I know you're also working with Roy and his organization to really be aware of where the need is and how you can work towards it. And I also love what you've talked about wealth creation. I think that's amazing. Just to finish, I think HEVA will continue being working with the industry on the three angles I told you about. So there is funding, which we have been doing since 2015, which we shall continue doing. It's our mandate, so we're not going anywhere. Also around policy and around being able to support organizations to be more resilient in a post-COVID world. Yeah, and then I really wanted to respond to someone. Sorry, Roy. There's a person
Yes, it's
who
okay.
asked about music, and I felt like the answer, he was asking about support for musicians to be able to access other services. And I wanted to tell, I think it's Joe, that there are already ongoing programs like the Perform Incubator that GIZ funded, and we are also working with Modoni with Perform Incubator. So they work with young musicians, and then they group them into the other support services that come with a musician. So there's also the talent manager, and they work to build the capacity of the support services along the musician to be able to, build a business out of the music sector. Yeah.
Excellent. Christine, 1 minute. The session will change in exactly a few seconds. Your closing remarks.
Just to say that we will continue to look at ways to connect artists along the value chain. So looking at where from education all the way to when their art is consumed. We want to continue developing those relationships so that they have more sustainable businesses, and that's really our focus moving forward.
Fantastic. So this has been your session on grants, loans, and investments. We have less than 30 seconds. That has been a very exciting session. And as I said, these are the who's in the creative space when it comes to financing. And we are pleased to have at least had the opportunity to speak about this. If you have any questions, put them on the comment section and then see what happened and see our responses. That has been from us. Thank you very much. All right. Oh, it didn't go off at 1 minute 90 seconds.
Maybe
Very
we
good.
have more
So,
time.
Fred, we need cash flow product. That's what we need.
yeah, I was just looking at the timing and I was like, oh my goodness,
Cash
it's
flow
1:30. All right,
Indeed.
back to our host, Mike.
No, I think we're excited. Excited.
Yep.
Excellent. What a fantastic panel. Thank you very much, Roy and team. Fred, so glad you were able to join us as well. Brilliant conversation. It will stay on Airmeet for the next 12 months. And it's always on our Facebook recording and YouTube if anyone ever wants to revisit it. If you did ask a question and for some reason the team didn't get to you, I doubt, but I've seen some other questions just come in just now. You can just go to the reception area and click on the button that says Networking Lounge. Go into the lounge and then find the lounge with the name of one of these panelists on it, and they will do some one-on-one with you. So if there's any other questions you asked, or you just thought of something else you want to ask, or you want to ask someone how to apply for a grant or a loan or what have you, you can just go now, especially he's a bank, so go talk to him now and see what he says, and let's get some things moving in the creative industry. Thank you guys for the generous sharing of your experience and your time today. We really appreciate you. Thank you for being part of the 7th annual ONGEA Eastern African Music Summit. Let's go to the lounge.